There we go. Today we are looking at the question of constitutional iridology, and we are specifically looking at case studies. We're going to look at two individual case studies today to see how quick and easy constitutional iridology is. One of the beautiful things about constitutional iridology in practice is that we don't necessarily look at every single marking we see, because that would be overwhelming. With constitutional iridology, we can do that, but oftentimes we're getting information that we don't really need when we do that. So we like to always consider, what is our client's health goal? Why are they wanting to have an iris assessment done? Most people truly don't want to know everything that could potentially be wrong with them. That's enough to make most people run screaming. On the other hand, most people do want to know what their eyes say about their current health conditions. And so we are going to look at the eyes from the perspective of a constitutional iridology assessment. I would love it if you're joining me, if you would let me know what your background is. Are you a herbalist, a nutritionist, another kind of a holistic health practitioner? I'd also like to know if you have any iridology background and what kind of background it is. Was it Jensenian? Was it Morse? Was it Pesic? Was it constitutional? Just so that I know who my audience is, so I can tweak this presentation on the fly. All right, so we're going to actually work through, in a shortened form, obviously, an entire first assessment for two different clients. And as we do that, do know that when I'm with a client, I do spend more time than what I'm going to be doing here. My first appointment is typically 75 minutes. Follow-ups are, depending on what the client needs, up to 60 minutes long. But the gist of what we're going to do here is going to be the same, regardless of whether we're looking at this in the whole context or not, because there's a lot of niceties, right? We do a lot of chit chat, get to know you kind of stuff in a first appointment. If you already do iridology, you will immediately recognize that we are not going to talk about every single marking we see here. And so as we look at this, this is the eye. And those of you who are seeing this on Instagram may see it a bit darker than what it really is showing on my computer screen, and darker than what it really was in life as well. This is the eye of a 20-something female. She's recently graduated from university as a school teacher, and she had landed her first job and was just getting ready to go start in that job. So I was seeing her, this was a year ago, August, that I saw her for the first time. This is her left iris, and we have frontal lighting. Now that's important because when we've got frontal lighting, we've got all the lighting coming from the front, and it masks certain markers. We often want to do a side light photo where we shut off one light, take a photo, turn that one back on, shut off the other light, take a photo. You may be able to see that there's a slight crease in her eye right here. With side lighting, these become much more prominent. So again, this is going to be the short version of what we did in 75 minutes with her. Of course, after hi, hello, how are you? The next question is always, what would you like my help with? How can I help you today? And she said that she had some challenges with depression and anxiety. She gets an upset stomach very easily when she's under pressure, and she gets a lot of upset stomach and pressure pretty much anytime she eats as well. So she's carrying a lot of anxiety with her, and it's been getting worse. She's also noticed that she has acne that has been getting worse in the past 3 months. So my next question to her was, are there any foods that are worse than others? And her first answer in that first appointment was no, except that she'd learned to avoid dairy products. So that really is a yes. And we always need to be careful with that to understand what they're really saying. So when they say, no, there's no foods that make it worse, then we need to always ask, are there any foods you've learned to avoid? Right? So when I asked that, it was, yeah, I don't eat dairy. Okay, what happens when you eat dairy? Well, my gut gets worse. Got it. Okay. Her diet was that she drank 1 cup of coffee a day, and she would have about 1 liter of water a day. She loves vegetables. She eats a lot of vegetables, including raw and cooked. She includes 1 to 2 servings of fruit per day. Now, in spite of the fact that she avoids dairy, she seems to be okay. And I kind of give that a little iffy, maybe okay with yogurt and cream cheese. She eats salmon and shrimp and poultry, olive oil, avocado oil, and for grains, she typically has bagels and oatmeal. She likes oatmeal for breakfast. So this is her left eye again. This time we've got that side lighting. Now I'm just going to pop back 1 image. I want you to look and see, can you see here how we've got the creases showing up a little more prominently? So for those of you who are on Instagram, trying to make this really clear for you, let's pop back that 1 image and see how those creases don't show up with frontal lighting. Okay, so we always want to play with the lights to get the best image we can. So as I'm looking at her eyes, I'm starting to get really excited. And my excitement is visible. I do not have a poker face. I really don't. And I got excited because her eyes also show me that she's an introvert, and shows me also that she's quite creative. Also shows me that she holds her stress in her gut. So I started asking her some questions. The first one I asked her was, do you prefer small groups or big groups? And she said small, and she loves one-on-one. All right. I asked her, did she find her student teaching to be creative? And she said, yes. And I said, what did you find the best part of that? She said, I love creating individual protocols, education protocols for students. Her specialty is special ed. She loves working with autistic children, and they need one-on-one teaching. And she said that's where she was absolutely the happiest, and the creativity would really come out as she looked for ways to reach those children and communicate with them. So that was great. She's, and I'm just getting so excited because she's found the perfect career for her, working with people one-on-one, things that are very creative. So her iris also suggests that she's got potentials for issues with blood sugars, endocrine hormones, endocrine system, including her reproductive hormones, and that she probably has a better relationship with her mom. And we see that when we look at both the left eye and the right eye, that the relationship with mom is typically it for her. Her right eye affirms that she is an introvert and more likely to have a weaker relationship with her father and with men in her life. And it also suggests that she has an insufficient digestion, particularly of protein. So we cannot tell her you don't digest protein well, because maybe she's doing all the right things and she's digesting protein fairly well, but her inherent potential from what we see in her eyes is that left to her own devices, left to a normal kind of a diet, which she clearly didn't have, she would probably have challenges breaking down proteins. Again, we go to the side lighting. Let's pop back 1 image. You see how there's no wrinkles visible in this eye at all? But when we go to the side lighting, can you now see that we have more wrinkles very prominently popping up? It's not that they magically appeared, it's that by changing the way the light hits the eye, it picks up the contours of the surface. So what does this mean? Why is this so important for her? Well, here's what it comes down to is when we see these wrinkles or these creases in her eyes, they are called contraction furrows. And they tend to be obvious in people who live in that sympathetic response, right? And so she does and that is live in mostly in the sympathetic nervous system response, which means that she's going to be a little more prone to anxiety and depression. So when we understand that, we understand that we need to make sure she understands the importance of and the modalities for supporting her nervous system. We need to make sure she's getting the right nutrients, that she's not taking certain things in, that she's got the right kind of self-care happening. So here's what we suggested on her first appointment, and that's all I looked at for her eyes for her first appointment. Is there more information in these eyes? Absolutely there is. There is a truckload of information, but it would have taken us on a wild goose chase. It would have taken us into things that she just isn't able to work with right now. She's not ready to talk about right now. And there's no sense in pushing her in that direction whatsoever, right? Work with your clients where they are, take them to the next step. So in her first appointment, what we recommended was eliminating the coffee. Coffee depletes the B vitamins, it depletes vitamin C, calcium, magnesium, it decreases the ability to digest protein, it messes with the hormones through the liver and the thyroid and the adrenal glands. So it's not a good thing, and it's not a good thing especially for this client. I suggested that we needed to get rid of doing a carbohydrate breakfast and instead do a protein breakfast. So I suggested having eggs for breakfast. She likes eggs, she digests them well, they feel comfortable in her body. And so we suggested, let's get the eggs going, let's get you chewing them well. We also we added to her 1/4 cup or 2 ounces of kefir for her, because I suspected, and there's nothing in the eyes that really tells me this, but from the amount of digestive pressure that she feels, it felt like to me as I was working with her that she might not have a well-balanced biome in her gut, or a microbiota. And we know that adding probiotics by a capsule doesn't actually stick well. It's a very transient uptick in the critters that we need in our gut. But when we get the critters from a food source, they tend to stick better. So we suggested kefir, suggested actually doing the coconut water kefir, because we don't want her going towards the dairy. Suggested using some stress bees, a stress potency bee product. Passion flower to help her sleep better, because the anxiety and depression was messing with her sleep a bit, and some N-acetylcysteine. That's an amino acid, and N-acetylcysteine is a specific here because it helps with phase 1 and phase 2 liver detoxification. Now, when we look at traditional Chinese medicine, they say that depression and anxiety come from the liver. N-acetylcysteine again works on phase 1 and phase 2 liver detox, which may help to reduce her symptoms of anxiety and depression. So that's all of the iridology we covered in that entire first appointment. We very carefully did not overload her with too much information. We know she's prone to anxiety. We know she's going into a new job. She doesn't need a 100% overhaul on her lifestyle and diet right now. What she needs is the right changes to create a positive result, but she needs the fewest changes possible to create that positive result. Does that make sense? Does that make sense, to do things that keep that focus without getting muddled up in trying to get her to be perfect in every way? So again, with this, it was all about getting her to understand how her body's put together, and how certain things that she was doing were not helpful, and how we needed to do some other things with her. At the 5-week mark, we saw her again. Her gut was much better, and she actually ascertained that gluten was another problem for her, that when she would have a bagel for a snack, her gut would cramp up. So that was a great correlation for her to report. Her depression was still high. It was still about an 8 out of 10. Her anxiety was manageable. But she'd also noticed that the depression spiked in response to perceived attacks. So she'd had an uncomfortable situation in the school with one of her parents, where one of the parents of one of the kids she teaches, and that parent had lobbed a very vicious direct attack at my client for something that the parent perceived was unfair and uncalled for. Fortunately, my client's principal heard the whole story, was totally on board, totally supported my client, and did everything he could to calm the parent down and to help the parent see that this was a justifiable action. It wasn't aggressive. It was simply saying this child could not go on a field trip because his behaviors in class had not been such that it was deemed that it would be safe to take him on a field trip, right? So they had the child's best interest at heart. What I did with this client after that was I taught this client how to use emotional freedom technique. Some people call it EFT, some people call it tapping, so that we could go through and undo the damage of these attacks. And she was able, as we did that, to actually go back into memories of her father verbally attacking her and begin to undo that work. So this is exactly the kind of stuff we teach: the IRIS assessment, the how to make a program, the nutrition, the supplements, what we teach in the course Confident Nutritionist Dynamic Iridology Assessment System. Quick little tiny 30-second commercial, and then we're going to do another assessment. So Confident Nutritionist Dynamic Iridology Assessment System is the only live online 40-hour fully mentored course for nutritionists, herbalists, and naturopaths who want to streamline their clinical work without sacrificing client care. So they can stop working unpaid overtime to develop client programs, so they can stop overwhelming their clients with undoable programs, and so they can create programs that will increase client compliance, success, and long-term retention. The next course will be starting on January 28th. We've just started a course this week. And so if you are interested in details of that course, please send me a PM or a DM, and we will be in touch with you. Here's what one of my students has said about the course. Karen came to me as a certified natural health practitioner with a specialty in digestive health. And this is what she said: Confident Nutritionist Dynamic Iridology has helped me to understand the relationships between the different organs and organ systems more in depth. Iridology also gives me an advantage of seeing the potential for different genetic traits and qualities that may be underlying. By observing the constitution, for example, you can extrapolate how the person's body will likely respond to applications of healing methods. Therefore, it has helped me to expand my knowledge and increased efficiency at providing more precise recommendations for health-oriented options. Wonderful, and we thank Karen for that. All right, let's look at another set of eyes. This is a female client who's in her mid-60s. She has been a client of mine for 38 years, and these are photos that we just did last year of her. We like to shoot photos every few years just to monitor the accumulation of pigment, to monitor Lipeemic Diathesis, to see what the sclera is doing. So when we look at these eyes, what we see, first off, you need to know this is a light reflection right here. Do you see the milky white film that's here? This is what we call a Lipeemic Diathesis. The Lipeemic Diathesis reflects to us, tells us that this person's liver enzymes have been out of balance at some point in time and likely are now. And I say that because of her age, and that it means that the liver is not able to properly manage handling carbohydrates. Now, what do you know about cholesterol? Cholesterol is manufactured from carbohydrates, right? And so when we see this kind of an eye, we want to ask questions about cholesterol. This is not an indication that her cholesterol is absolutely out of whack. It's an indication that her liver enzymes are out of balance and she may not be handling her cholesterol properly. But we also need to remember that the liver enzymes regulate to a certain extent blood sugars and a whole lot of other things. The liver does 500 different jobs, right? So it can make whatever mess it wants of whatever it wants to. And so I asked this client, what's your blood chemistry? What's your lipid panel? And yes, her cholesterol was elevated. Then I had to ask, what about triglycerides? Yes, they're elevated too. What about your hemoglobin A1C? Because she also, over the 38 years that I've known her, she's been gaining weight. And her A1C, her hemoglobin A1C was also elevated. And if you know your labs, hemoglobin A1C is an indication of inflammation that always accompanies type 2 diabetes. So when the A1C is getting higher, or when it's above a certain level, we know this person is playing with type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance. So then I needed to look at her sclera, because the sclera is dynamic and the sclera gives us all kinds of information. Now, do you see right here that little mark, that little cloudy bit right here? And looking very, very closely, I don't know how well this will show up for our Instagram friends. At the end of this blood vessel, can you see it's beginning to go a tiny bit cloudy? Just a tiny bit right there. This is what we call fermentation sign. Fermentation sign means that and because it's in the sclera, it's dynamic, it's current right now. The irides are inherent, the sclera is dynamic. These little markings tell us right out of the starting blocks that she is not handling carbohydrates properly. They're fermenting in her body. They're not digesting, they're fermenting. And so, of course, then I'm looking at her A1C and going, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I always ask my clients to bring in lab tests, lab results, because the lab results are really important. Then, and so she's come into me saying, I feel like a train wreck. She's a herbalist. She knows her nutrition. She's caring for a husband who is in failing health with terminal illnesses. And she's really at her wit's end. She has not been paying attention to herself at all. And so she says, I feel like a train wreck. And so when she listed off her meds and there was a blood pressure medication in there, and I look in her eyes and I go, yep, we've got a blood pressure indicator right here. And so we check her blood pressure. We discover she's got white coat syndrome. And that's an interesting thing. So what did I do with her? Obviously, with these markings where we see the liver, we see the fermentation sign, we see the blood pressure, I asked her about her diet. She was drinking coffee. She was eating foods that her husband wanted to eat. She's beyond trying to feed him healthfully because he is terminal, and a very complex terminal case. It's not a typical cancer situation, for instance, or a typical heart-lung situation. And so she's given up trying to prepare healthy foods for him because he won't eat them anyways. So she was eating the kind of food he was eating. She doesn't like to leave him alone. He has no problems going off and doing stuff by himself. And so doesn't have any activity in her life. She's feeling very restrained and restricted. So we talked about her diet and what she really needs. And I could go deeper with her on this because she knows herbs. She knows nutrition. Right? She knows these things. She's worked in health food stores, right? She knows her stuff. So I was able to say, we need to go back to the basics. We need to get protein into you on a consistent basis, like 3 or 4 times a day, small servings. We need to up your vegetable intake radically, dramatically. We need lots of leafy greens. We need to be nourishing you because you've got to take care of your husband. And if you're not properly nourished and you feel like you're falling apart, how can you possibly take care of him? And it's like, oh yeah, put your own oxygen mask on first, right? It's what it comes down to. And so we got her doing these things with the diet, really being conscientious about her protein, lots of vegetables, getting enough water, getting rid of the coffee, got her walking 3 or 4 times a week, which is not quite enough, but it was a whole lot better than before. So I was willing to give her a big way to go for that. And after just 2 months, her A1C was normal, her cholesterol was normal, her triglycerides were normal, and her blood pressure was much more stable. She was still on the blood pressure medication, but she was finding she could use a little bit less, and her blood pressure wasn't spiking and jagging all over the place. So again, is there more to pick on with her eyes? I'm just going to flip back through her photos. You bet there is. There's a truckload of stuff we could talk about here, but she wasn't in a time or space to do that. She was not in a mental framework for us to go deep. We needed to focus on the things that were most important for her right now. Get her feeling that little bit better, then we could build, right? And that is so, so important. So there's 2 quick case studies. Notice we didn't touch on the fact that she's got contraction furrows. We didn't even touch on the pigments that are here, which could be a little worrisome. We didn't touch on the fact that she has what we call ferrum chromatose. There's a lot of things we did not dwell on here because they would not have taken us where she needed to go. As we continue to work together again, and my clients that have been with me for all these years, they come in for several appointments and then they go off and they do what we've talked about. And then a few years later, they come back and we bring them up to speed for where their body's at. And we just keep working step by step with them rather than literally vomiting everything we know all over them, overwhelming them, frustrating them, and making it so they can't actually do a program at all. Right. So that is 2 quick case studies, beginning to end, the kinds of questions I asked, the kind of program we developed for them. And yeah, there we've got it. There we've got it. So again, just a quick reminder that the next go round of Dynamic Iridology Assessment System for holistic practitioners is coming up, and it starts on January 28th. Registration is open. If you would like information, please send me a DM or a PM so that we can be in touch to talk about the program with you. Thank you so much for being with me today. I hope that was informative. I hope it gave you a bit of a glimpse into the difference between a constitutional iris analysis and the kinds like a Jensenian or a Morse or a PESIC analysis, just so that you can weigh what would work best for you in your clinic. Thanks so much, and we will see you on Wednesday. Bye for now. Except that Instagram is not letting me